Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with a super unique deck from Loki Charms. This is Mishra, Eminent one, built off of a D&D villain that Loki Charms created. I love this idea. I think, especially looking at the last video I made, you may get the impression that I am a little harsh on flavor inclusions, but the way it is if you tell me there are flavor inclusions, I'm very happy to accommodate, but I'm not sure to what degree. Like, if flavor inclusions aren't specified, I am going to judge them on their merit, right? And this is a flavor-built deck. Like, all of it has to do with the flavor of this D&D villain that aims to slowly piece apart their enemies. And I think that's fine, that's great, that's within colors, that's a lot of fun. It's not flavor in the sense of like using an artist or using a set, so there's a lot more wiggle room, and I really like this. Loki Charms has a lot to say, but I'm going to try to sum it up. The main idea of this deck is we're going to use Mishra to make copies of specifically these kind of gesture style cards that are meant to interfere heavily with our opponent's deck construction and their ability to formulate a plan. Jester Cap is going to be a bit of the poster child of this, where this is a form of targeted exile, well, not even targeted, sorry, specific exile to go through their deck and take out key pieces to stop them from making their game plan and to stop them from stopping yours. Traditionally, this is done in formats that are 60 cards to take out combo pieces to render a deck, you know, null and void. If you ever played Surgical Extraction, you know kind of how this works. The difference is in a 100 card singleton format, Jester's Cap gets a little weaker. You have 3 opponents, you have a lot of cards to choose from, there's a lot of redundancy, but at the same time, you can really cut down on your opponent's ability to interact in certain methods with well-timed Jester Caps. Think of how many single target removal that some players play. Think of how many board clears. Think of how many win conditions certain decks might play, or how many really big beaters they might play. So a card like Jester's Cap is really good when combined with someone like Mishra, who will constantly generate new copies of this Jester's Cap, allowing you to constantly make more and more and get around the one-time use of these cards, which I think is really cool. One of the things they're thinking about is consistency, its win conditions. They understand that the deck isn't very competitive, but they want it to move a little smoother. They're very open to budget, but generally they want to keep some of very specific thematic cards, such as Puppet Strings, such as the Jester cards, these kind of cards that work really well. I like the mask theme as well. There's a whole flow to this deck that I think is really cool. And I want to keep that in mind, but I have a few ideas on how we can kind of tighten the vice around our opponents a little more efficiently while cutting out a bit of the chaff that exists within the deck. But before we get into that, we're going to take a look at the commander. And if you wanted to take a look at these deck lists ahead of time, you can always join us on the Patreon, where, you know, you join the Discord and you get to see these deck lists early. You get to make your own comments. And if you're looking at something like Mishra and you're thinking, hey man, I could do this instead, you could be commenting on this YouTube video, or you could be commenting with others in advance, which can be helpful to me making the decks. Okay, long spiel. Let's get right into it, because this deck is a lot of fun and I am excited. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Mishra Eminent One, and why are they very specifically our commander in this deck? Well, Mishra is here for specifically how they work. They are 5 mana, Grixis Human Artificer, 5/4. Grixis, of course, is blue, black, red, and they have one ability. At the beginning of combat, you create a token that's a copy of target non-creature artifact you control. It gets a new name, and it is a 4/4 construct artifact creature. It gets haste, and it gets sacrificed at the end of turn. Traditionally, you use this with cards to basically animate artifacts into 4/4s, that's the general animation power and toughness, smash them into your opponents, getting any, ETBs or die triggers. I'm thinking of Mycosynth Wellspring, Ichor Wellspring. These kind of cards are traditionally how Mishra works. But here, we want to make copies of cards that very specifically are difficult to otherwise get a lot of copies of. And that is the core of the deck. So looking around here, if you want to take a moment, this is the kind of deck list that I really recommend you open up yourself. Take a look, pause the video, try to find out the points of pressure. I think they're kind of straightforward, and I think a lot of my suggestions are going to be not the most fun suggestions because of the nature of a deck like this, but I hope to make up for them with some fun additions as well. So let's start with probably what I think are the two greatest pressure points. Actually, before that, because I forgot last time, let's talk about lands and mana curves. We're at 38 including MDFC, which I really do like. Our curve is kind of heavy in 3s and 4s. Due to the nature of the kind of deck we're playing, there's actually not really a way to get around that. A lot of the effects that we want are just in those mana zones, so I can't be too hard on it. Obviously, we're going to try to cut a few of them here and there. We got a few cards here like Unmask and Waterlogged Teachings that technically are not 4 mana spells, so there is a little bit of leeway, but as a whole, this is a problem that we're just going to have. So, okay, let's look at the two pressure points that I think this deck really does have. One that's a little more straightforward than the other. And one that makes the deck a little more fun. So let's go with the straightforward one, and that is what I'm going to call the Extraction Suite. And so what the Extraction Suite are a series of cards that are basically modeled around cranial extraction. You name a card, you look at their deck, you look at their hand, you look at their graveyard, and you exile all copies. Now, this is really good in the sideboard of certain 60-card decks or certain one-on-one formats where you don't have singleton. Obviously, one day you're going to roll up and your opponent's going to be playing a million, I don't know, persistent petitioners or like a rat deck or something, and they'll never talk to you again after you resolve this. That's fair. But realistically, these cards are just a little overpriced for what they do. And there's really no way around them. I know they're super flavorful. I know that the idea is there, but I'm going to say any of the ones that are 4 mana and above just need to be cut. Unfortunately, they are just overpriced in a deck that just doesn't have leeway to be casting these cards. We have so many things we need to do that this is just not going to happen. And generally, the upside of these cards is that you find a card and it is gone forever. This is not the case in Singleton, right? We are paying 4 mana to exile 1 card, where if we compare this to Sadistic Sacrament, a card that I adore, this works way Better, right? The idea of Sadistic Sacrament is that it's fundamentally weaker because in 60-card formats, because it doesn't take the full playset out of a card, which hurts. But, and this is a big but, this is reversed in Commander, where you actually prefer this ability because you really like to take out 3 separate cards. The kicker, of course, is just gravy. I'm going to tell you, you're probably not going to kick this often, but when you are just casting this card, regularly, you're going to get the result you want far more often than any of the 4 mana cards. I wonder, this is a side note and maybe someone can answer this. I feel like sometimes I watch YouTube videos of other content creators who will talk about cards like this, and they'll get really excited and tell you how good it is when you kick it. And I really just don't want to give that impression because I want to make you guys into really good deck builders and players, even at lower powers. And I feel dishonest if I would tell you you're going to kick this and it's going to feel great. I think if you kick this, you had nothing better to do, because even in this deck where it's thematic, 10 mana is an extraordinary amount that you would rather do other things. So I don't know, just a thought. So Sadistic Sacrament I think is great. I'm going to say the Cranial Extraction, the Memoricide, Unmask is fine because it's free. Life's Finale even is, these are all cards that are just so outclassed that I really think they're not great. On that note as well, I think Duress does have to go. I recognize the power of duress, and we're gonna get back into discard cards a little later, but and I do love this art, but I think here is just not where it belongs, because at this point I'm gonna say you got to be playing Thoughtseize. Like, if you're gonna play one of these effects, let it be Thoughtseize, because it's just going to solve problems way better. And even then, if you're going to play this, I really don't want you to play this. Quick spiel is that a counter magic spell is a 1-for-1 with your opponents, which already sucks in a 4-player format. You're already getting behind. But you at least get the benefit that your opponent has spent mana, potentially their whole turn casting one spell, and bam, you get to counterspell it out. It hits commanders, it hits a lot of different effects, whereas a Thoughtseize effect, once again, amazing in 1v1, really struggles in this kind of format because you can't get their commanders, you can't hate them out of cards that they paid mana for because you're preemptively doing it, and the prevalence of graveyard strategies are so high that it's not even like you're going to miss that card forever. So I would not, and if I would, it would be Thoughtseize. Okay, so that's kind of a straightforward section. Let's talk about a less straightforward section. We're going to talk a little bit about Peak, and Peak and these effects are the kind of cards that I've talked before, but I love talking about, because this is traditionally what we would call a trap. What do I mean by that? I mean that outside of very specifically Gitaxian Probe, because it's free, which you should play. There it is. Yeah, good. I was worried. Outside of like Gitaxian Probe, Peak effects are bad in the way that I'm going to say make you a worse Magic player. Now, I'm going to go into what I mean by that in a second, but I'm going to contextualize this as a deck that really wants to know what your opponents have in hand. And we have quite a few ways of doing that, so I'm not too worried about that. But even then, when you know what your opponent's hands are doing, you get more information, you can make more distinct decisions. So I'm going to say something going back to the main idea, and that's, why do these effects make you worse as a player? And the idea is as you play Magic, as you learn your opponent's decks, as you get better as a player, you should be able to intuit this information, I'm going to say 6 times out of 10. Commander's a hard format, Singleton's really bad, and you may not be able to name the cards in their hand as you would in a 60-card, multi-card format, but in Commander, you should be able to vibe out what their game plan is and how far they are along it. If it is turn 5, the way they are playing, the cards they are putting out, the way they play their lands, this should tell you how they are playing. You might say, Cursed, that's insane. I cannot do that. Well, first of all, I believe in you. Second of all, it is possible. It is a thing you have to do in Magic. It is a muscle I really want you to exercise. And cards like Peak are really holding you back from being able to do so, because it is making you lax on that muscle. Whereas the deck like this that requires a very strong understanding of your opponent's decks, strong memory as you exile cards, what you should be hitting next, because after that first search through their deck, you now know what's in their deck and you need to remember that for your next ones to work. Like, it's demanding a lot. And you might be like, well, I want to take a break and not have to memorize their hands or think about their hands. And I'm going to say, tough luck. You are playing this deck for this purpose. You gotta get good. And it's harsh, and I don't blame you if you don't want to follow through on this, but I think it is the correct thing to say. Now, I'm not saying maybe necessarily take all of them out. Once again, Peak is a card that competes with Gitaxian Probe, which is much stronger, and I like it here. But it also competes with Telepathy, which is way more interesting, because Telepathy creates a situation that your opponents start squabbling among themselves, or it creates a situation where they work together. So be careful with this, but it is interesting. There are a few additions, or one specific addition that I want to put in here that is going to make these cards worse. And that is my greatest worry. So to me, I want to cut all of them. I think that that Gitaxian Probe can stay. I think you pick Telepathy or Peak, and that's fine. But every time you cast another extraction effect, every time you use a Thoughtseize effect or something, or among a few other things, you get information anyways. If you combine that information with how people play, you know what's in their hand. You'll do great, I believe in you. So these are the things I'd like to cut. Then, let's go a little further and a few other things I am thinking about, and I'm going to leave our deck builder to kind of think about. And it is the concept of removal. This deck is not really playing removal. And so we're in situations where we don't have really board clears, we don't have Blasphemous Act, we don't have Toxic Deluge, like we have Life's Finale and I want you to cut it. So I want a few board clears, and then I want a few targeted removal spell. I want Dismember, I want Pongify, I want the other Pongify whose name I cannot remember, Rapid Hybridization, I did remember. I want these cards because you cannot stop everything, you cannot play around everything, and I want to create situations where you get the advantage of, you know, doing some really strong plays, especially with board clears, to make up for the fact that you are like really all over the place. Your opponents are creating boards while you're extracting cards, playing a Blasphemous Act, and then going back to extracting cards can get you really far ahead and earn you another turn cycle, which I really, really like. This could also extend to cards like Propaganda, which I haven't put in here, but getting some time to do what you want is going to be very, very valuable. And for these cards, I do want to pressure a little bit our Teferi Tezzerets. Both of these feel cute. I do appreciate that Tezzeret Artifice Master is going to draw us a lot of cards, but it is just kind of overcosted for that when we could be playing a number of other black draw effects that are just better, which we will also get into. And Tezzeret the Seeker, I do appreciate can be used to get extra activations or create more mana, and then the tutor ability is cute, but we are playing Vamp Tutor, we're playing Demonic Tutor. Do we really need these 5 mana spells that feel just a little clunky for what they're doing when we could just be much lower to the floor? There's an argument that cards like Demonic Tutor and Vamp Tutor that we're already playing can artificially boost the power level of a deck that is just trying to do weird things. And with that in mind, I do get that. I just really, I think the deck kind of needs the help, and those kind of cards aren't too intrusive. So for me, the Tezzerets should just be removed for just removal or something lower to the ground that lets you stay in the game. I want to go back for a second. There's a Glasses of Urza. I just wanted to look at the target player's hands I didn't mention. I just want to take a moment to say, please cut this. This one's going to be the worst you will ever feel, because every time you tap this, if you don't already know someone's hand, you're going to have that immediate FOMO that you didn't pick someone else. Because you're going to go, oh, I didn't know what was in their hand. And all of a sudden you realize you should have picked someone else. And yeah, yucky feelings. Okay. Those are going to be generally my my notes. I think there might be something worth noting about Relic of Sauron as being a card that's probably just really close to being overpriced, like mana-wise, for what we want in this deck, where I think like Thran Dynamo, where it taps for 3, or the one that's 3 that taps for 2. I think I would like those maybe a little better. Your mana is really tight and really careful, and this mana fixing really doesn't interest me when you have so many other options. But even then, there's also the conversation, should these talismans be removal instead? Because I do understand how ramp can get you where you are, but as a power level check, if you are dropping mana rocks and your opponents are building a board, you're going to be in trouble functionally. Right? The way this deck works functionally is it doesn't really work on the battlefield as much, and so if they are getting any form of early advantage, like if Esper Sentinel comes out in play, this deck is going to have a bad time. So just having targeted removal to deal with that, as opposed to just trying to ramp through it and ignore it, I think is probably worth considering. Likewise, Chromatic Lantern, I really don't think it belongs here. I actually do really like your non-basics. I really like your mana base, so I think it's a bit unnecessary. And even then, I just think it's just not where you want to be. Okay, that's a lot of cards that really caught my attention that I don't particularly like. There's a few more here and there. There's a bunch I do really like, and so I'm not going to go too much into the rest. These were the specific ones I really wanted to bring attention to. So let's talk about additions, and let's start with the boring stuff. It's really just this one is the boring stuff, but I do think it bears repeating. Knight's Whisper is here standing in for all black life loss draw, because I'm going to say the deck needs it. You are playing cards that do not traditionally get you card advantage, so you need to be rebuying cards over and over and over again. And this is not necessarily meaning you need to play Knight's Whisper, Read the Bones, Rowan's Grim Search. These are like the one-off effects that immediately get you cards. And instead you might be leaning into Phyrexian Arena, Necropotence, Dark Confidant, cards like that that will just slowly refill your hand and keep you going. This is really up to you to decide. But I do think you need to play some. You don't have to. This is just the most boring answer to the problem, because it's like, we got to solve this kind of problem we're having where our cards do not get us ahead in board state, and so we need to refill. Okay, let's get to the fun stuff. So the fun stuff, at least for me, starts here, because Oppression may as well be not just a card I like for this deck, but kind of the idea of this deck, right? We're here to punish your opponents for existing and wanting to play a game of Magic. That was foolish on them, and now they need to suffer. So one of the directions that I wanted to consider for the deck, you don't have to go in them, and these next few cards all are one package really, is that a way that we get to the point that our surgical extraction effects, our Jester Caps, all of these cards get stronger and stronger is by applying enough of pressure on our opponents that we've bought ourselves time to basically take off to just do whatever we want, right? And so we're in black, we're kind of a stacks deck, and so the discard and hand pressure suite really catches my eye. So we've got Oppression to especially hit opponents that really need to invest in lots of spells, Spellslinger, things like that, synergy decks. This will hurt them a lot. Bottomless Pit, that's going to hurt control decks, mid-range decks, any decks that want to out-grind you in the cards that they want. You play Bottomless Pit, you leave it on the battlefield. Every turn cycle, they lose 3 cards, you lose 1. You're going to be ahead on a long term, very, very strong. Or a lot more direct, Liliana the Veil, also Liliana Waker of the Dead. These are cards that just all have each player discards a card, just applying a ton of pressure consistently that enables your opponents to get lower and lower on cards and just not be able to make really, really good decisions. If this was another deck, I could possibly suggest a lot of the Burglar rat creatures, so like the 2 mana, each opponent discards a card, but I think that's going a little far. Likewise, I like to usually say Painful Quandary here for even more pressure, but it's not really that kind of deck. It is not you want to punish your opponents for casting spells. You actually just don't want them to be able to cast meaningful spells at all. So Painful Quandary feels a bit out of place. I'm still going to say it out loud here because the deck builder did ask about alternative win cons, and Painful Quandary probably is the correct decision, but I didn't put it here because I think there's more fun things we can do. Likewise, another different kind of win condition that I think is interesting here is Shrieking Affliction. Now you might be thinking, but Cursed, we want our opponents to have cards that just rot in hand. Shrieking Affliction is not going to be a really good solution to that. And I say to that, we'll get back there. We'll get back there. But at the moment, Shrieking Affliction is a really nice win condition because it doesn't require your opponents to be discarding in order for the damage to get through. They just want them few, low cards on hand. And with that in mind, you might have said, what do you mean we don't want to discard? Well, herein is where I think is a really fun angle of attack for a deck like this. A card that in a black-blue mostly deck, I feel like has been ignored. And that's Urabra's Heretic Praetor. The Praetors are known for just being really, really strong, almost universally, because they mirror an ability onto your opponents and make them pretty unhappy to be having those abilities. And Urabrask has a really, really strong ability. I would suggest for sure that people really underestimate how good this card is. It's just difficult to keep around, much like all the other Praetors, because of the pressure it puts. This is nice because like the card advantage is that you get to impulse draw, but that second line of text, or I guess third, is where we really want to be using this. Urabrask turns your opponent's natural card draw into an impulsive draw. They have to use it this turn, otherwise it evaporates. This is killer with the other like discard cards we were showing, because now the pressure isn't being evened out by their ability to draw cards and sandbag lands and things like that. Now all of a sudden they just are not going positive from cards. They're still in the game, don't get me wrong. If they draw a lightning bolt, they'll cast that lightning bolt, but generally they're going to be suffering from card disadvantage over time, and there'll be more pressure put onto them to make the right play at the right time. I think this is a really interesting angle. I really do wish we had more cards that had this ability, but I think this is really, really cool and pretty meaningful in a way to interact with their opponents while still having a 4/4 haste, something the deck is rather good at making. Likewise, almost dramatically so, of course, is Jin Gitaxias Core Augur, a game changer card, which means we might not have room for it, but this is a card I adore. I really think people are too mean to this card. This card is amazing. And the fact that this is a game changer, but Elish Norngran Cenobite isn't, is boggling to me. But regardless, Jin Gitaxias is Elish Norngran. Just gonna quickly check. Yes, okay, I am vindicated. Jin Gitaxias is going to be the other way to end this problem, where, like, you know, it gives you all the card advantage we need. That's cool, just like the previous card. But let's ignore that for a second. We're just looking at, once again, that final line of text. We're looking at our opponent dead in the eye and saying, your choices are starting to not matter anymore. Do what you like, but at the end of this turn, you have nothing. And you cannot plan well when that's the situation, right? All of a sudden, with an ability like this, and I would say even to an extent, with an ability, oops, I am pressing the wrong keys, ability like Urabrask, your Jester Cap abilities, your extraction abilities get way, way better, because you can start removing cards that just keep these, that would remove these, so take out their targeted removal, take out their board clear, and then after the fact, because you know about the number of cards they're going to have in hand by end of turn, specifically with Jin Gitaxias, but to an extent with Urabrask, you can start ignoring cards that are very synergy dependent, right? Cards that are dependent on casting multiple spells. Cards that are dependent on, for example, I would say even like counter magic gets to stay, because all of a sudden Urabrask says, oh, you drew your counter spell? It's impulsed. After your turn, you can never use it. You actually drew nothing, right? It lets you be a lot smarter with your extractions, and that is, I think, the direction this deck gains a lot of power. It lets you play efficiently and intelligently, and that I love. I absolutely love. This is just in a wildly different direction. I really don't think it works, but I did want to put it in here, and that's Forced Fruition. If you've never played against this card, you have no idea how stupid this card is. I feel like people are just like, oh man, I love drawing 7 cards when I cast a spell. And I think to you, how many spells do you have left for the game? Probably less than you think. Now, there is something to be said that when you cast this spell, it gives your opponents an opportunity to destroy the Forced Fruition. But there's like this kind of politics in it, because you have to do it correctly, right? Because if you destroy it and then the other opponents have drawn 7, it puts them in a better situation, right? You want to be the one who destroys this last. You want to be the last one who triggers Forced Fruition. You want to cast Disenchant, and you want to have destroyed Forced Fruition and drawn 7. That's an amazing deal. But if your other 2 opponents have only triggered Forced Fruition once each, you don't want to destroy it because they've gone really ahead as well. So instead, you're very much so incentivized to let a few triggers go off, let people draw half their deck, and then destroy it and hope you have taken the least amount of damage. It's kind of wild. It's a really big mind game card. I don't think it belongs here, but I'd be remiss not to mention it. All right, so Spark Devil is here because I think this is a really important angle of attack this deck can really use. I've been trying to figure out how we can make the most out of Mishra, because Mishra is a very unique effect and very uniquely works with the Gesture Cap angle, and Spark Double and every other card that clones something but keeps it non-legendary really catches my eye, because I want multiple Mishra activations per turn, right? And if we have 2 copies of Mishra, we get 2 Gesture Caps, which means we get to do this twice. This, of course, works with a number of other artifacts that we have that are just beneficial effects, right? That we're just getting extra Mishra's triggers, and I think that's rather strong. So we do have the means to use these kind of cards to take advantage of it, and I'm almost immediately now thinking, do we want extra combat effects for this same ability? And I don't know about that. I'll leave this to the deck creator to think about. I don't think there's any that I really want, but there is merit to say that something that allows you to have multiple combats will also trigger Mishra multiple times. However, a lot of those cards require quite a bit of mana, so I don't know to what degree that's going to really work. But there's definitely something there. Maybe it's not modified, but maybe there's something there that's worth considering. I'm just going to leave that up to you. It could be really neat. But on the base level, I do just want to clone Mishra, get extra abilities, get extra effects. Likewise, in a really weird way, Saw in Half works here in interesting ways, because you can kind of, either you can make a clone of Mishra, Saw in Half, get 2 Mishras, or you can clone something with Mishra, create a Jester's Cap, Saw in Half, get 2 Jester's Cap that don't evaporate at end of turn. I don't know. I don't know if I love this, but it did really catch my eye, and I did want to bring it up. All right. Another target that I thought this deck could use was Ariet's Tempting Apple. There's something here that I think is unique, where you could just play Ariet's Tempting Apple and just use it as a general target for Mishra while you're setting up, which means every combat step, you're basically gaining, you're using Threaten effects or Act of Treason, one of your opponent's creatures, and then after that creature comes onto your side, maybe you could find a way to sacrifice it, maybe you could attack it into another opponent with politics to destroy it. There's a lot of really interesting things you can do. It's a very distracting ability that requires very little of you while you're setting up and while you're just getting ahead on advantage and setting up your cards to win. I don't know to what degree it's crazy good, but I think there is something neat about it. I really like how it attacks the board in a deck that struggles to do so. So there's something here. I will say, obviously, it is legendary, so there is this kind of problem with it that every time you create the copy, you do sack it immediately. You still get the ETB, but you can't sacrifice it for food or its abilities. It's not great, but it's something worth considering. Okay, Knowledge Pool. Knowledge Pool is a really interesting card, if not an immensely confusing one. And with Mishra and how your deck works, it's really cool. I don't know if it's good, but I'm gonna tell you about it anyways. So the way Knowledge Pool works, for people who haven't played with it, is it creates a literal pool of cards, the knowledge, that every time a player casts a spell from their hand, they basically exchange that card for one of the cards in the pool. The whole idea is that the cards within the pool of any player are available to all of the other players. And every time a card goes out, a card comes in, and we have the same pool to dig from, but players have to cast spells from it and cannot cast spells from their hand, right? They'd have to cast 2 spells a turn to do so. What's interesting here is what happens when you have multiple knowledge pools, specifically when Mishra creates a temporary knowledge pool. One of the big problems is that we're creating this pool of cards that our opponents are getting more and more selection out of, and that sucks. But if we create a pool, a temporary one, we exile all our opponent's cards off the top and a few of ours, so we're doing the thing our deck wants to do. We attack with the knowledge pool for sure, but for the rest of that turn, we're in a situation where when we cast a spell, we get to basically pick out of 24, right? 24 of the best cards at minimum in both pools. And that's fantastic. That's great. And when that turn is done, when that pool goes, your opponents can't continue to dig out of it, basically slowly hating them out of the game. This, I think, is really cool. I don't know in practice how it's going to work. Knowledge Pool is a card that sometimes is being used with other pieces like 3 mana Teferi to lock your opponents from being able to cast spells out of the pool to lock them out of the game. I'm sure there's some equivalent within Grixis, but I'm not sure what it is. It is just a really interesting kind of mechanic that I think is worth playing, but it is very, very confusing, especially you can see down here what happens if multiple knowledge pools are on the battlefield. But that's the kind of zaniness that I think this deck goes for, so I did want to mention it. Finally, the last one in my mind is an effect that I don't really think we have a lot of other ways to trigger really easily, and it's Whirlpool Warrior. Now, this is specifically good in a way when you can either use those peak effects, which is funny that I told you to take them out, or, like I wish you do, intuit your opponent's hands and understand when to do it. And the whole idea is that if you pair red with this card, each player shuffles their hands into their library and draw that many cards. It is a fantastic, fantastic reset button. It allows you to put yourself into a position where your opponents are just going to have to rebuild their hand that they've been sculpting out of what's in their deck. Once again, whole purpose of the deck is that we're making, or whole purpose of our deck is that we're making their decks terrible. So doing it as a mathematical ploy where, you know, odds are the hand you draw is going to be worse than the hand you had, really, really cool. I was looking for a way to do this in artifacts that the deck didn't have, doesn't exist, so this is still somewhat interesting to me as an option. And that's it. That's my thoughts on the deck. I think it's super, super cool. And I'm going to say straight up that I probably missed a lot of things. There's probably a lot of different combinations and ideas that other players may know, and I hope you comment into this video because this deck is so, so cool, and I think there's a lot of ways it can get really, really strange, and I value that a little more than good. Make it strange before you make it good. Thank you so much for sending the deck. I think it's really, really awesome. Good luck, and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.